I'm going to revisit one of the books that I reviewed a while back. This is actually a novel by Dean Koontz. This is The Eyes of Darkness. Now, I reviewed this a few months ago, and this came out in, I want to say, this was printed in 1996. And this is important because the original book was printed in 1981. Now, I have a copy. This is a good reason to run down different editions of things. So, this novel was originally printed in 1981. Let me just confirm. Yes, 1981. And both books tell the identical story of a kid that gets abducted. I'm going to spoil it a little bit, so fast forward a couple of minutes if you don't want to have the story spoiled for you. But essentially what happens is this woman and her husband have their son disappears while he's on some kind of trip, and they're told that he died in some terrible accident. This winds up breaking up their marriage, and all these terrible things happen to her. Then all these weird things start happening, and she starts wondering if maybe something else is going on. And it turns out her son has been infected with a biological warfare agent and is being tested and experimented on in this underground facility in northern Nevada. So that brings us to the difference in the two books and why this is kind of interesting given all of the political intrigue happening right now. As many of you, if you're following this channel and watching all the crazy going on in the world, what's really interesting is allegedly right now the Russians, as I record this is March 17th, St. Patrick's Day of 2022, and the Russian military has allegedly taken possession of 20, I believe it's like 26 or so biological laboratories in Ukraine. And it's interesting, since this happened, Russia Today and other Russian news outlets have been censored in the United States. So the little bit that's leaking out is from people with VPNs that are then taking some of this information, doing screen captures and sharing information. There's probably better sources out there that I'm not aware of. I'm not a tech savvy guy. So at any rate, allegedly the Russian military is saying that this appears to be these facilities that they've uncovered in Ukraine are being used to test and produce biological agents that could be passed on by way of migratory animals and things like that, and spread to wide areas, and under the guise of it being a natural plague, which is terrifying and also goes back to some of my talks about cattle mutilation, because I think the cattle mutilation riddle is crucial to understanding the modern biological warfare implications of things like COVID-19. So in this book in 1996, and I'll just read this paragraph because this is kind of a crucial plot point. So when they break into the lab and they're rescuing this little boy, and one of the scientists that they're talking to out of guilt, he starts spilling his guts about what exactly is happening. So I'll just start right in the end. For the pub, so this scientist's name is Dombey. So he says, for the public record, the kid's mother is asking him, hey, didn't we get out of the chemical warfare business? And he says, for the public record, we did, Dombey said. It made the politicians look good, but in reality, the work goes on. It has to. This is the only facility of its kind we have, talking about the facility that this kid is abducted to in the novel, to northern Nevada. This is the only facility of its kind we have. The Chinese have 3 like it. The Russians, they're now supposed to be our new friends, but they keep developing bacteriological weapons, new and more virulent strains of viruses, because they're broke, and this is a lot cheaper than other weapon systems. Iraq has a big biochem warfare project, and Libya, and God knows who else. Lots of people out there in the rest of the world, they believe in chemical and biological warfare. They don't see anything immoral about it. If they felt they had some terrific new bug that we didn't know about, something which we couldn't retaliate in kind, they'd use it on us. Another character says, but if racing to keep up with the Chinese or the Russians or Iraqis can create situations like the one we've got here, where an innocent child aren't we becoming monsters too? Anyway, he mentions that that this was generated in a lab in, trying to find the exact part here, Wuhan 400. There it is. Okay. Wuhan 400 is a perfect weapon. It afflicts only human beings. No other living creature can carry it. And like syphilis, Wuhan 400 can't survive outside a living human body for longer than a minute. So he's saying this is called Wuhan 400, and I'm going to back up a little bit here. To understand this, you have to go back 20 months. It was around then that the Chinese scientist named Leigh defected to the United States, carrying a diskette record of China's most important and dangerous new biological weapon in a decade. They call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside the city of Wuhan, and it was the 400th visible strand of man-made microorganisms created at that research center. So here in 1996, this edition, we have the Wuhan lab, of course, we all have heard about that, being the culprit for the development of this biological weapon that has the potential to spread. Now, what's interesting is in the 1981 version of the same book, we have the same kind of deal here. This is, and I'm going to skip ahead here to understand that. So this is basically the same paragraph, just rewritten here. But this is the original way it was written. Was to understand that, Dombey said, you have to go back 20 months. It was around then that a Russian scientist named Ilya Paparapov defected to the United States, carrying a microfilm slide of the Soviets' most important, dangerous new biological weapon in a decade. The Russians called the stuff Gorky 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of Gorky. And it was the 400th visible strain of man-made microorganisms created at that research center. And then it goes on to say the same thing. So why is that important? I think that's a really interesting change there. You have this is the Gorky 400. So this is labeling a biological weapon as something that originated in, at the time, would have been communist Russia. And this one updates it to be communist China. Now, obviously, this is wild speculation here, but I find this in light of the laboratories discovered in Ukraine that appear to be contemporary laboratories for the purpose of generating new biological weapons. I'm inclined to think that some of the writing on this was adjusted to fit kind of the narrative when the Soviet Union fell, it was updated to be the Chinese baddies. So anyway, I'm curious, any of you that have followed with me through this far of the video, if you have any thoughts on why you think that might have happened. I find it interesting that everything was the same except the country and city where the biological weapon originated and was adjusted for those circumstances. And I find it interesting now that both of these locations are relevant once again. Not necessarily Gorky, but again, a Russian connection to that. And of course, now we have the Russians claiming that they have shut down an attempt to develop these weapons. So make of that what you will. There's a lot to parse out there as far as information warfare also. So I'm curious if any of you have thoughts on that, but I find that a really interesting difference between the 1981 edition and the 1996 edition of Dean Koontz, The Eyes of Darkness. And of course, this was printed under the pseudonym of Leigh Nichols. So there you go, Dean Koontz, Eyes of Darkness, or Leigh Nichols. So just an update. Curious of your thoughts on that.